Okay, so this is the last chapter of the story. Isabel got in, um, got into Bridewell Prison and was able to get Curzon out in a wheelbarrow. He's kind of on his deathbed. He's not talking. He's kind of very weak, and so now what is she going to do with him? She's got to get to the ocean to get a boat while the tide is still high, or to steal a boat. So let's see if she does it. The prison was 10 blocks from the wharf. I covered the first 8 blocks as fast as a girl pushing a near-dead lump of boy could. Then I stopped. A sentry fire was lit at the corner, burning between us and the last 2 blocks to the wharf. 6 British guards stood warming their hands, their muskets leaning against the small pile of firewood. A dog lay at their feet, head resting on its front paws. One of the men stretched his arms over his head and gave a mighty yawn, and his companions laughed at him. The dog lifted his head once and looked in our direction, but a soldier reached down to scratch his ears, and he relaxed. If I tried to push the wheelbarrow over the cobblestones, we'd be arrested in an instant. If it were half an hour earlier, we could have tracked backward and gone down another street, but the tide wouldn't wait. I backed up slow as I could, cringing with every creak of the wheels. Once we were well out of the sight of the men, I pulled the blankets off Curzon. "Get up," I whispered as I helped him from the barrow. "We need to get past those soldiers. After that, it's only 2 blocks to the river." "Boat?" he asked, leaning against a wall. "Of course. Follow me. Stay close." He took 1 step forward and collapsed against me, the 2 of us crumbling to the ground. "No," I scolded as I stood and pulled him to his feet. "You have to try harder." "Sorry, country," he muttered. He was not strong enough to walk on his own. I was not strong enough to carry him on my back, not after pushing him so far. I pulled his arm across my shoulder and had him lean on me heavily. "Step quiet," I whispered as we drew close to the corner again. 20 paces of open street separated us from the shadows on the other side. One of the soldiers walked to the woodpile, picked up a split log, carried it to the fire, and tossed it on the flames. For the moment, all the men had their backs to us. "Ready?" I said to Curzon's ear. He nodded. I drew a deep breath, and we started to walk, soft as we could. 20 paces stretched 20 miles, every faint crunch of our shoes sounding like a gunshot. 5 steps, I counted silently. 6, 7. Curzon had little strength in his legs. He faltered and almost fell again. I wrapped my other arm around him and clutched his shirt. 8 steps, 9, 10. The dog lifted his head. He stared right at me and barked. One of the soldiers, startled, shouted, "Look at that!" and pointed to the sky. The heavens exploded into the red glare of rockets and white fountains of light. Curzon and I stood as if planted, amazed at the sight of the fireworks being shot off in honor of Queen Charlotte. The dog barked furiously in our direction, but the soldiers were all staring at the illuminations above. The noise rolled up, booms that sounded like thunder and cannons. The men all smiled and laughed at the spectacle. I dragged Curzon across the street and down the last 2 blocks to the wharf. It was dark, no watch posted as I had hoped. "Thank you, Mama," I muttered as we crawled into a rowboat. Curzon groaned. "What you say?" I untied us from the wharf. "Never mind." But he was already insensible again, and I picked up the oars. I rode that river. I rode that river like it was a horse delivering me from the devil. My hands blistered, the blisters popped, they reformed and popped again. I rode with my hands slick with blood. My back, my shoulders, my arms, they pulled with the strength of 1,000 armloads of firewood split and carried, of water buckets toted for miles, of the burdens of every New York day and every New York night boiled into 2 miles of water that I was going to cross. Set after set of the Queen's fireworks exploded over the roofs of the city, over Canvastown, over the mansions that held the King's subjects in their ball gowns and fancy dress uniforms. Her fireworks blasted off, and everybody gazed into the sky. And I rode and rode and rode past their homes, aside their warehouses, underneath their cannons, and out into the open harbor betwixt New York Island and Jersey. My wits wandered some, about the time my hands started bleeding. Tongues of fog oozed across the water and curled around the bits of ice that floated past. I saw in the fog the forms of people. They never came close enough that I could see their faces. Once I reached out, feeling a warm presence, but I near tipped the boat over and had to grab for the oar before it slipped away. So she's kind of hallucinating now. She thinks she sees these people. My hands plunged into the icy water, and I rowed and rowed, but it didn't hurt after that because my hands were frozen. I rowed, and the tide pulled, and the ghosts, who could indeed travel over water, tugged my boat with all their strength. My eyes closed, and the moon drew me west, away from the island of my melancholy. Remember, melancholy is sadness. When my eyes opened, I knew I had died and passed on to glory. Heaven was crystal lit with white angel fire, colored peach at the edges. Heaven smelled of wood smoke. I blinked. The Bible did not mention that heaven smelled of wood smoke. I blinked again. When I opened my eyes, they watered because of the bright morning light. The rowboat had come ashore in a tangle of bushes that overhung a small bank at the side of the river. The branches overhead were all coated in ice. I was coated in ice, too. That fractured and crackled as I moved. I looked at the water, and then to the rising sun, and then to the water again. I looked around me. No houses, no ships, no wharves. The river was narrow and floating out to sea, south. The sun rose beyond the water at the other side of the river. I was on the west bank. I was in Jersey. I had set myself free. I wiped at the water that flowed down my cheeks and kicked at the stinking bundle at the bottom of the boat. "You alive?" I asked. The bundle groaned and pushed aside the shredded blanket. Curzon lifted his head enough to look at me sitting there with a fool grin on my face. "Where are we?" he asked in a thin voice. "I think we just crossed the River Jordan." I stood up, steadied myself as the boat rocked a bit, and offered him my hand. "Can you walk?" So that's the end of the story. Can you walk? Where do you suppose she's walking to? They're in Jersey now. She says they're free. That was a great time to get free because all the officers and most of the townspeople were at that ball, so they didn't really notice her rowing away or even doing those 20 walks across that street past those guards. Thank goodness for fireworks, right? And so this is what this is what it says at the end. So you can see it says, "Runaways. Notice to readers, one and all, be hereby advised that the account of Runaways, Isabel Gardner, formerly Sal Lockton, and companion Curzon Bellingham will be continued in the forthcoming volume called Forge." So if you want to see if they make it to actual freedom, or if maybe they are free already, pick up the book Forge, maybe at the library or online if you have what do you call it? I can't think of the word. If you can read it online. But the book is Forge. And then after Forge, there's a third book. And they're all, if you've enjoyed this, you'll love Forge and then the following story. So check out those books too. And be sure to keep reading this summer. Okay? All right. Thank you for listening and enjoy your summer reading. Bye. See you next year in 5th grade, actually. I'll see you in the halls of Longfellow. Have a good summer.